Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Summer Summit of the Reimagining Theological Education Initiative of the Convergence Network. We're really glad to have all of you as a part of this. There are more than 70 people who have registered to be part of our 2-hour live conference today. And we're going to experience the Reimagining Theological Education Summit in 3 distinct ways. One of those is what we're doing now, where live panelists are going to be interacting with you as the participants. So you're going to see what you see now. You're also going to experience some pre-recorded videos that are going to play on your screen. You don't need to do anything. They will just play right on your screen for you. And those are some thoughts that have been put together by the panelists. The third way of interacting is that we're going to put you into breakout rooms where you're going to have a chance to interact with around 6 people at a time. And in that case, your webcam and audio will be turned on. So you will be talking with people and not reading and watching. So very much like you might experience if you were at a live conference, we will move from, if you can imagine, this building that we are in now, and we're going to have you go into breakout rooms. So you can imagine if you're at a conference, physical conference, you would stand up, you would walk out of this building and go into another building, and you're going to meet together in a lobby, and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms. So in a few moments, half an hour or so, after watching some videos, you're going to be invited to get up and click your mouse to take you into another room, and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms, and at that point, you will be talking with one another. So we're pretty excited about this. We're using this technology called Zoom, and for us, it's the first time we've run a conference using this technology. So be patient with us, if you would, while we try our 3 ways of interacting with panelists, talking with each other, using pre-recorded video, and doing breakout rooms. It's actually kind of sophisticated and sort of a big deal, right, that we can do this. So I know to some people this is all very normative, and they've run online conferences and know how to move seamlessly between live and video and conversational breakout rooms. So to those of you for whom you're already competent at this, go slow with the rest of us, and we're gonna do the best that we can to have the full experience of a conference setting. There are people from all over the United States and people from Canada and others from around the world, because it is the internet, so people are connecting with us from a variety of places. I did mention that there are panelists, and one of those panelists is Philip Clayton, and Philip is going to give us a few thoughts about this project of what the Reimagining Theological Education Initiative has been about and where we see it going in the future. And so it's my privilege to introduce to you Philip Clayton.
Working on the Reimagining Theological Education program for about 2 years. We received generous funding from the Carpenter Foundation, and this seemed like one of the signature programs of Convergence US, because it gave us the chance to rethink the training of future leaders in ways that are appropriate to emerging religious, spiritual, and theological needs, ministry needs in North America. We began, after receiving the funding, to ask, what kind of changes are necessary? What types of ministry are people being engaged in today? What did leaders in the future look like? It was clear that change is necessary. It's clear that people are doing radically different things. And if I can be a little bit blunt, it's clear that most seminaries aren't keeping up. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, there was basically one route into ministry. You went to a seminary, you received the MDiv, you looked for a big steepled church, the bigger the steeple, the better. And then someday you had the privilege of going back and getting your doctorate of ministry and putting those letters on the sign outside the church. That's simply not the way that most people are doing ministry today. In the early months of the Reimagining Theological Education program, we explored the kinds of innovation that were going on across the United States. Found they fell into 3 categories: innovations within seminaries, on the boundaries between seminaries and other kinds of partners, and outside seminaries altogether. Just one example from each. Within seminaries, we found, for example, the building of modules where a person could construct her own way through the seminary program. So she takes some basic classes in Old Testament and New Testament and so forth. And then depending on the mode of ministry that she was looking for, she'd choose a particular way or pathway through these modules. In partnerships between seminaries and non-seminary entities, we found, for example, creative partnerships with coffee houses, creative partnerships with pubs, with social service organizations, with community organizers, with interfaith organizations. And each of those brings a new kind of education and connects you in ways that you weren't connected before with outside, non-seminary programs. And finally, there were types of innovation that stepped outside of the seminary world altogether. Religious organizations that needed kinds of training that didn't move through the seminary world. Smaller groups that couldn't afford seminary education, but that began to launch their own training offered through large churches, and so forth. That led us then to structure a series of working groups to study these different approaches. The working groups ask the questions: what are present and future leaders needing? Who are they? What context will they be ministering in? What kind of curriculum and pedagogy do they need? How different is it from the traditional seminary programs? And how would it be delivered? Online, hybrid, face-to-face? What financial models are available to make sure these things are sustainable? And lastly, are there completely different forms of credentialing systems that seem important? These working groups met for several months. They're producing written reports on their research. And then we brought them all together in March in Los Angeles to ask, how could we pull the pieces together, and what new options are there for credentialing systems? We were able to make so much progress because we had convened a national group in October with 24 reports on kinds of innovation that are taking place around the United States. We could draw from those results and from the research results and begin to consider some options for new credentialing systems. This webinar arose out of that project. We took those results of research from the Reimagining project. We combined it with other programs from the Convergence Network, which you'll hear about more during the call. And we're at the point now of formulating the questions, stating what the needs are, and beginning to implement innovative programs, experimental programs, trying out options that people haven't tried out before, evaluating them, finding out whether they do better for preparing faith leaders for the next generation than most of the seminaries are doing. We need to evaluate, should we do these in partnership with existing seminaries? You'll hear about an example of that later. Should we do them completely outside the seminary world? Who are the people who need to be served? Are they at the table? What are the specific needs of different ethnic and racial communities, of people doing social work, interreligious work, chaplaincy, spiritual direction, or people preaching or writing or leading traditional congregations in different ways? So you can see the complexity of this task. I hope that we'll be able to get it across to you in the next couple of hours. But I think you can also see the innovative directions that we can move in the future if we focus, if we work together in larger networks, and if we're not frightened of moving in vastly different forms of creative rethinking of theological education altogether. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Philip. This is one of the ways that we want to interact with all of you, is around these kinds of live presentations. Philip, fabulous job. Another way is that we've prepared some thoughts in a video format. Now, all of what we're doing here in the online conference is being recorded. So if right now you're thinking to yourself, boy, there's some people that I really wish could have heard Philip's presentation, know that all of this is being gathered up in a video recording and will be available to you to disperse to people that you think would be interested in these conversations. But we've also pre-recorded some videos, and Jeremy has put together some of his thoughts, and he'll tell us about a video that he's created.
The credentialing model that we've begun to design is focused on providing credentials for practices and the various competencies that fall under those practices. A practice would consist of 5 to 6 competencies and the theological reflection necessary for weaving those competencies together into a holistic practice. It's also important that the practice can be differentiated from other practices, forms a person's spiritual identity, develops a community of practice, maintains integrity while also being contextualized, and that it can be applied. So this is not just all knowledge, but rather is action-based. One example of a practice might be community organizing, and a competency underneath that practice would be Introduction to Systems Theory. Or another type of practice would be worship and preaching, and a competency underneath that practice would be readings of the New Testament. Our hope is that this system will be able to certify not only programs that train people in an entire practice, but also individual content providers who may just teach a single competency under a given practice. Students then can be certified by either working with a program that trains in an entire practice, or by working with individual content providers to gain the competencies, and then working with a mentor who can provide the theological reflection necessary for weaving those competencies together into a holistic practice. We feel like we have a solid foundation or backbone for this structure, and now our goal is to reach out to a diverse web of programs and individuals who can help us provide feedback and further develop the system.
Thanks, Jeremy. Philip, I wonder if you have a few thoughts, a few reflections on the video content that Jeremy provided about who should be included in this project.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that I find what Jeremy just shared to be immensely exciting. I hope that all of you can see how different it is from the ways that we've approached theological education in the past. In the past, and this is also the route that I've walked, you move to seminary and they tell you what's important. Move through the steps, often in lockstep, across the years of your program, worrying each semester about your growing debt and how difficult it will be to find a position where you can pay even a fraction of that off each year. And also you grow more and more frustrated that the whole thing doesn't seem to be moving in the direction of your own ministry. Then you find out at some point that the model you're learning and paying so much for was invented about 200 years ago by a German guy who wanted university in Berlin to work right. And you think, oh my God, why am I paying these bills? What you see completely different in what Jeremy is describing, what the Reimagining program of Convergence is doing, is placing practice at the center. Not just any practice, but the one you're called to engage in, the one you already have experience with, the one where you know you can make an impact on the kinds of people you want to work with. Having identified the practice, then you get to ask, and people who are experts in your field, hey, what's needed for leaders in this practice? What kind of community needs to emerge? Then the leaders, the strongest people in that particular area, can begin to draw up the needs, the criteria, the expertise that you need to draw on. And then finally, they can help certify that you're a leader in the practices in which they're experts. And again, these can be small, specific practices or much broader frameworks. So I hope you can see how what Jeremy is describing, what Convergence is moving toward, represents a radically different model from what we've had before.
Thank you, Philip. You can see that there's a list of panelists on the top. I've already introduced myself. You've heard from Jeremy and from Philip, but you'll also see that Eric Samuelson, Brian McLaren, and Kelly Lehman are with us. So we're going to take just a brief moment and have first Kelly and then Eric, and then you'll hear from Brian in a moment. Just give a brief reflection on their part of the process of reimagining theological education initiatives. So Kelly?
Yeah, I'm Kelly Lehman. I am a United Methodist pastor, and I also teach at a public university and a school of education. I worked on a working group, or I convened a working group who worked on pedagogy during the process. So the goal of our group was to look at different ways of doing pedagogy that are currently being used in theological education, and then bring those to the rest of the group to play around with.
Thank you. Eric, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Eric Samuelson. I'm a ELCA Lutheran pastor and theological educator in various formats. And I chaired the credentialing working group. And what we were looking at was this system, sort of the system level of how you might credential both the programs and the people that come out of these programs, and how a network might be formed around those. You'll hear in my presentation, we've sort of flipped a bit, thinking that maybe the network is the key, and the credentialing system will kind of emerge out of that. But that's the work that we've been doing.
Thank you. And Brian, would you give us just a brief introduction?
Brian McLaren. I was a pastor for 24 years. For the last 10 years, I've been traveling and speaking largely to denominational leaders and clergy, to a whole wide array of seminaries, and also a lot of what we might call experimental faith communities that are trying to fill in the gaps where traditional forms of church life either haven't taken root or haven't yet arrived. And all of that has made me feel the deep importance of both shoring up everything that's good and strong and valuable in our traditional approaches, which is incredibly important, but also opening up our boxes to very, very different ways of thinking, like the example that Jeremy just gave.
Thank you, Brian. The project of reimagining theological education spans the entirety of the theological community and the Christian community and around the country. There are so many people who are involved in so many different ways. One of the phrases that's often used when you try to organize people around a large system is, who's at the table? And that's a functional metaphor, but it's kind of an odd one to use in an online video conference. Because we're not really sitting at a table. The manifestation of someone is, are they online? Do we have the right people online, or do we have them on screen as opposed to at the table? And we've recognized that this project, because its invitations have only started, that we're just at the very beginning stages of this project, we don't have all the voices and all the people online or on screen that we need to. And Brian and I had a brief conversation about this in Florida a couple of weeks back, and we'd like to show you that video now.
Brian, a lot of us have been talking about this in these ways and other ways for a lot of years. Do you see any dangers in how we talk about this, or in this conversation itself?
Yeah, a lot of dangers. One of the dangers is who is at the table. So to have two white guys talking about this, we miss a whole set of issues. I'll just give you an example. White churches are in trouble. And so, and there's all kinds of challenges for predominantly white churches, right? And so we could be saying, we need to throw on a lot of the,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there are a lot of folks for whom traditional degrees really mean a lot.
Right.
And it plays a big, big role in another whole set of dynamics that are the very opposite of things that are bothering, let's say, young white leaders who see it not working for their denomination. Same thing for, minority communities in the United States. Church has a completely different function,
Right.
a whole set of positive functions and a lack of negative functions that for the predominantly white churches, that they're struggling with. So I think one of the things we've got to remember in the middle of all this is that who is at the table for the discussion is tremendously important. It's one of the reasons why in this Reimagining Theological Education project, we're trying to find and bring in a lot of different voices. And we're constantly having to pull ourselves back from making generalizations, like the system isn't working. Well, guess what? I would say if it weren't for traditional theological education and traditional ordination, we would not have made as much progress as we have on LGBT equality. Because those traditional structures are one of the ways that we created social validation. And even though it's been contested and problematic and so on, those structures have helped us get somewhere. If we didn't have the structures, we might not have.
Yeah, there's a sense in which, you know, there's improvements where you try to solve a problem. There's innovation where you try to take advantage of an opportunity that's being missed. Then there's invention where you want to make something new for new outcomes. And if we think we're solving a problem with improvement, then we have to focus on the problem. But if you work on innovation, like what could we do together that would be better? You don't have to focus on the problem. You can start with, hey, you've learned something, we've learned something, here's a new opportunity. Or if you were bold enough to move into the world of invention, you could say, what should the world look like, and where are the sources of that future world that we're going to live in? And you don't have to be problem-centric and coming up with a single response to solve a problem. You get to create a world that you want, and that's where the different streams could come together for innovation and improvement. We do need to solve, or innovation and invention, we do need to solve some problems, for sure, but we can't stop at only solving the problems, right? Well, that solution has to lead us to the more beautiful and that our heart knows are possible.
Yeah, exactly right. And I really like those three levels because they remind us that some of us are being paid to solve a problem.
That's right.
Others of us are being paid to seize opportunities. Very few are being paid to imagine and invent. But there's great opportunity.
There is.
And if we can resist the temptation, when this might be what I'm excited about. This is where somebody to criticize them for not joining us. It's so short-sighted.
That's right.
No, all of us are important, and if we can keep the racial and social and cultural diversity in mind, and the legitimacy of all these different projects, that will help us, I think, reimagine in a more.
Yeah, because there's almost no way to be innovative and inventive if you've cut yourself off from any part of the system, especially for people who have different experiences than you. That's the only pathway. Yeah.
Eric had mentioned that networking is the solution to some of these situations we find ourselves in, as opposed to figuring out a solution to the credentialing. Eric, I don't know if you want to say another word or two about that before we show your video, but this impulse to say, let's create the right network really seems to be something important. Do you want to say a word or two before we show your prepared video?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we found as we've done this work is this right people at the table, or like the right people online in many levels, and we're very aware of the lack of racial diversity. I mean, you can see it on the screen, and so that's a really critical element of this. And then as out of that, as Brian and Doug said, how do the different challenges that different communities in different contexts, how do they face these things? So if we're all talking to the same people, there's some value in that, but then how do we learn from each other? Because there are things that aren't working in my context that are working in other contexts, and there's so much to learn from each other. And when we're just disconnected and don't know each other and don't share the challenges and the joys, how do we know that? And so here we are trying to reimagine theological education for the church. And let's be the church, and let's do it that way. That's kind of my thinking on that. And I think as this moves forward, that piece is really going to be critical for things moving forward.
Thanks, Eric. Your video now suggests to us that not only should we have a diversity within the theological education, but there's some things that we can learn from other industries and the kind of work that they're doing. So here's your video.
The fundamental challenge with theological education today is not accreditation or methods of delivery, but an underlying assumption that theological education can and should be universalized, systematized, and homogenized. This is a modern assumption based in 19th and 20th century context that prioritizes academic over contextual learning, doesn't pay a lot of attention to formation, and reinforces race and class-based disparities. This has an impact on theological education, on Christian leadership formation, and eventually on the entire church. We know through relational connections with people engaged in theological education both inside and outside of the current system that the landscape of theological education is changing. From the dominance in the 20th century of university and professional graduate school-based models, new forms of theological education are emerging across the country and around the world that are smaller, more agile programs that focus on contextual learning and localized leadership formation. While they account for only a small percentage of theological education overall, the number of these programs is growing. What they lack is a system by which they can interact with one another, share information, and learn from each other. They also don't have a way in which the leaders that they're forming can be credentialed and recognized outside of their local context. Our hunch was that a new system of credentialing, possibly following the tech industry model of stackable credentials, might be the emerging idea that would draw these various partners together into a national network for mutual benefit. As we developed the stackable credentials concept and created a prototype for such a model, we quickly realized we had the cart before the horse. What was needed was a network of practitioners who could form a community of practice. We also realized that despite attempts to avoid the pitfalls of the current models and their assumptions, that what we created was rather top-heavy and not grassroots, and that we did not have the right people at the table to develop a model that would meet the needs of theological education for the diversity of contexts in the 21st century. While we still believe a new model for credentialing theological education is needed, we now believe it will emerge from the community of practice as it grows, rather than be what pulls the community together. And we see a model for what this might look like in a rather unlikely place, the beer brewing industry in the United States. In the 1870s, there were over 4,000 breweries operating in the U.S., small operations with limited distribution that served local markets. From that peak, the number of breweries was shrinking through the next decades, and Prohibition in the 1920s hastened the decline. Following Prohibition, the number of breweries rose once again. But soon the decline continued as breweries continued to close and consolidate, to the point where, in the 1970s, only 44 companies in the U.S. were producing beer, which by this point was a commodified, universal product with minor brand variations and national distribution networks. Consumers, not satisfied with the current offerings, could brew their own, but homebrewing remained illegal until 1978. But in the 1980s, something began to shift, and the craft brewing movement started to emerge, with a total of 8 craft breweries in existence in 1980, small, agile operations that served local markets with a much wider variety of ever-changing options. By 1994, the number of craft breweries had risen to over 500, and they began to network and share information, to form guilds and associations, to develop best practices, and to create systems for evaluation. By 2015, the number of breweries in the U.S. once again surpassed 4,000. And yet, though craft breweries make up a majority of breweries in operation today, the percentage of the market these breweries serve remains small. Only 5% of the beer market was made up of craft breweries in 2010, though that number is sharply on the rise. The U.S. beer market today is a hybrid. Most beer continues to be produced and consumed by a small number of breweries, though with a much wider range of offerings than 40 years ago. A number of smaller breweries fill in niche markets, meet localized demand, continue to innovate, and, increasingly, operate as research and development arms of larger producers. Today, the Brewers Association, which describes itself as an organization of brewers, for brewers, and by brewers, brings together 3,100 breweries, both the smaller craft breweries and the larger commercial breweries, along with 46,000 home brewers, all committed to improving the overall state of beer production at whatever level, though it's the small independent breweries in particular who find this network essential. We believe that a network analogous to the Brewers Association could be an important part of developing new forms of theological education into the 21st century. Right now, congregations and denominations are homebrewing training programs in their localized context, just as communities have done since the earliest days of the Christian movement. Some are developing these programs into nano seminaries, parallel to nano breweries, which are offering competency-based training and certificates. Some are emerging as micro seminaries, which are offering unaccredited degree programs to meet the needs of students in specific contexts. Yet we have found, while many of these craft seminaries are offering similar and compatible programs, they're by and large disconnected from one another and are unaware that others are innovating in similar ways. Like the craft brewery movement, these emerging programs represent a small percentage of the overall theological education market, and likely always will. A network of craft seminaries will form a web of relationships, a network for sharing best practices, and for shared resources, including potentially a new model for accreditation and credentialing. This could emerge as a new community of practice from which new innovations in theological education could be developed. We believe these programs and the network that we're proposing will play a critical role in the future of theological education as it adapts to the ministry needs and challenges of the 21st century.
Eric, just like to say, I think you win the Reimagining Theological Education Top Video Award for 2016. You made the rest of us look like we're doing Blair Witch Project.
That's my students. I set them loose and they did their thing. I couldn't help myself.
I think it's fantastic, and I think it really shows the kind of capacity and kind of creativity that exists. And once you start thinking about the format, you start to unleash a whole new level of creativity. So congratulations on the video. And Kelly, you have also been thinking about these networks and a discussion about what the networks would actually do. And you've also prepared a video. Do you want to say anything before it, or are you good with us just rolling the video?
I think I'm good with you rolling it.
Okay, we'll roll the video and then we'll look for your commentary afterward. Thanks.
In March of 2015, there was a white paper consultation as part of the Reimagining Theological Education initiative. One of the presenters was a Hispanic woman who was doing alternative education, theological education for Hispanics. She was asked to summarize, what do you need to be able to continue your work into the future? Well, what she said originally just slid by me. I really didn't think a lot about it at all, but it's something that I have thought about a lot since then. It keeps going over and over in my mind as I've been doing this work in the last year and a half. She said that to continue doing the work that she was doing, she needed pizza and a room. And then she went on to say that she's already doing the work that we're talking about doing, that the cultural conditions are basically requiring her to do it because it needs to be done in order to educate her population. Her statements, her comments during that white paper consultation have constantly reminded me of two things. The first is that there are people on the fringes, on the margins, already doing this work. But the second thing is they don't need an organization to come in and tell them what to do or tell them what a credentialing system should look like. Instead, they need to be offered support and resources and the conditions to be able to do the work that they're doing to make it sustainable and healthy into the future. So what is the role of the organization or association in the network of innovative theological education programs? Certainly we can offer pizza and a room, but what more can we do to help support those programs? As our working groups have talked over the last couple months, we've been using the image of a catalyst to describe the role of the association. Our goal is to bring these innovative programs into close proximity with each other so that there can be some great chemical reactions that happen. Ideas will bubble up and there'll be some great fizziness that happens between them. As the catalyst, our job is to not tell them what to do, but instead create the time and space for them to come together so that the future is defined by them. We have learned that it's important to have the right people around the table in order to get these fizzy chemical reactions to happen. It's going to require the organization and association to be really good listeners, to be able to facilitate the discussions, to be able to create a safe space where people can be honest about what their needs are and what their hopes are for the future. It's going to require us to be able to listen to the themes across all the innovative programs so that we can distill some value statements. This is the room part of the pizza and room. So what's the pizza? Just asking these innovative programs to come together while the organization or association just listens in probably isn't going to be enough. These startups have limited time and resources. They need tangible reasons why they would want to opt in. The association can offer a structure for communication. There can be a website that has resources on it. There can be digital publications that provide the best practices in pedagogy and instruction and curriculum. There can be conferences with trainings at them. There could be a directory where people can then have access to each other. We can create avenues that meet the needs of the people who are involved in the process. This really is a balance of a teeter-totter. On one side, we have the pizza. On the other side, we have the room. On one side, we have the organizational structure in place so people want to opt in. On the other side, we have the safe space of listening where these innovative programs can come together and have chemical reactions.
Thanks, Kelly. Excellent video in your own right. Boy, these last two presentations had me thinking about a trip over to Pizzeria Lola for a summit. The beer and pizza connection works for a lot of us. We've done a little thinking here about what a network would look like and what a network of reimagining theological education nodes would look like. Jeremy's got a few thoughts on this, and then we're going to ask you to go into breakout rooms. That's going to happen in just a moment. I just want you to start thinking now about the questions that we're going to ask you to address in your breakout rooms. Like, if a network like this existed, what would you want from the network? And what do you think a program like yours, or one that you can imagine, or one that you've heard about, could contribute into the network? So in just a few moments, we're going to ask you to click on a link. It'll take you to another room, virtual room, and you're going to be doing what the panelists are doing here, looking at each other, videos on, and talking with each other. So I'll say more about that in a moment. But Jeremy, you've been doing a little thinking and prepared a video to help us think about what the Convergence Network has done to think about the creation of this network. Do you want to say anything about that, or should we go right into your video?
I think we can go right into the video. The only thing I'll say is that we're looking at some tangible next steps, and so this sort of highlights what those next steps might be. As we begin to build the network, we already have a few first steps in mind. We'll immediately begin reaching out to programs that we're already aware of that we think may want to be a part of the network. The theoedu.org website will take on a slightly different shape as we start highlighting stories from these programs and sharing their successes. Early on, we want to foster conversations so that we can get a sense of the needs that programs have and respond to them by finding out what resources we can share together. Finally, we'll host a series of conversations at the Open Faith event being put on by another of the Convergence initiatives, Open Network, in early October. We hope that you'll join us for these conversations and dream with us about what we can do together. Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay, everybody, we're going to now put you into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes or so. In our second hour of this online summer summit, we're going to have more interaction time. So we'll explain a bit more about how to use the questions and interactions, but we want to get you interacting with one another at this point. So Jeremy's going to pop up on our screen another link for you to click on. Now, what's going to happen is you'll click on that link and you're going to be randomly assigned into one of these breakout rooms where you're going to have 15 minutes or so to interact with one another. We're going to ask for some reflection back from those rooms. So if one of you would offer yourself up to be the one who would give some reflection back if something is said in your room, we'll do that when we come back here after our breakouts. So you're going to click on that link. It will put you in a group of roughly 6 people in a room, and this is where your video camera and microphones will be on. So if for some reason that's something that you need to make an adjustment for, do that before you enter into the breakout room. Okay, so here's how it's going to work. If you see over in the chat room, and if you're don't have the chat window open, down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat icon that's very familiar to a lot of us if you've been on the internet or on your phone. If you were to click down into that chat, you'll see a link. And it's another one of the Zoom links, and it has a different number. And if you click on that, it's going to take you out of this room, and it will say you're going to leave this room and you're going to go to another one. So just sort of imagine you're walking out of this building to go into another building where all the breakout rooms are. You will come back here. What's going to happen in your breakout room is when it's time to be done, a indicator is going to come up on your window, and it's going to say this room is going to close in 30 seconds. And that gives you time to finish up your conversation, and then you will click back into this room. And Jeremy, you're going to put up another chat icon, or another chat web link that'll bring people back here. Okay, so if somehow you get lost, just find the link that brought you into this webinar in the first place after your breakout room, and that'll bring you right back here, and we'll all be waiting for you in our very Star Trek-like experience. So we're going to beam you out now into another room on another little planet, and you're going to interact with each other. So go ahead and click on those links now.